And this is what sinners hate, is the true God, because they're hostile towards God. Look at 2 Timothy chapter 3. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 4. Paul calls unbelievers here lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. Why do they hate God? Because they love their sin. Because they love pleasure. When he says lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, that's sort of an idiomatic way of saying they love pleasure and they hate God. He's not saying they love pleasure more than they love God. They love God, but they love pleasure more. No, he's saying they love pleasure and they hate God. We saw a tragic, horrific example of this week, just down the street from our church campus. As a street preacher, evangelist named Schmidt was on the corner of 51st Avenue in Peoria, explaining to people how Christ had saved him from his sins. And as people drove by and were sitting at the stoplight waiting for the light to turn, he would proclaim the gospel to them. And people hated him for it. They called him all kinds of unspeakable names and yelled and screamed at him. But this week, somebody was so filled with hatred for Christ that as he stood on the corner explaining how God had saved him from his sin, they shot him in the head. Last I heard, he was in critical condition. If you think of him, Schmidt, you might pray for him and his wife. Very tragic situation. Very sorrowful. You say, why in the world would somebody do that? Why would somebody the guy's not out there panhandling. He's not bothering anybody. He's no threat to anybody. He's no danger to anybody. Why would somebody come up and shoot him in the head? Because they hate God. They hate God. They hate Christ. They don't want to hear the gospel. They don't want to hear the message of the cross. They don't want to hear how God redeemed a sinner from sin. They don't want somebody out there sharing about Jesus Christ. And because they hate God and they hate the gospel and they hate the message of the cross, they shot him. Now, not everybody manifests their hatred of God that violently. We're thankful for that. But understand that every act of sinful rebellion against God is an act of hatred against God. And the condition of those who are perishing is that they are hostile toward God. And when they hear the gospel, they hear something that to them sounds foolish, so foolish and stupid and offensive to them that throughout history, many people, including the Apostle Paul, were killed for preaching the message of the cross. Evangelists and preachers and missionaries aren't killed for preaching Christ because people naturally love God, but because people hate God.